Hi, everybody. So let's get started on our second task this week, which is where you took your one of your warm to cool intervals, and the other was your analogous interval, and you're bringing them into a design to demonstrate how you can use color with to create depth. So let's start with that for just a minute here. I'm looking at everybody's submissions here, and I'm pretty much seeing everybody do that successfully in terms of choosing a color in your gradient, your interval here, your intervals, the color that will most come forward. Like in this case, um, this is a lighter uh, cool color right in here, and it's progressing backwards, back in space to the darker color, a darker color. In this case, both of them are cool. On this one, we've got a warmer color at the front, and we know it's the front because it's like the top layer, you could say, of the overlaps, and we're diminishing to the darker, cooler color. So we're seeing warm to cool, light to dark, um, warm to cool, and this is light to dark. Um, Light to dark, or you could say the other thing you could say about this one too, it's actually more accurate to say it's that the area that has the lowest contrast recedes, and the area that has the highest contrast, in this case more, difference between the light and dark. Same thing with this one right here, that creates that sense of depth, you know. Okay, good. Yeah, so this is like warm to cool. This is warm to cool, light to dark. Um, this is light to dark, and warm to cool. Yeah. So all of these three, this idea of like, and also, the other thing that I haven't mentioned here too is also more saturated. Like this looks maybe to me like it's warm. It's also more saturated, and the cool color is maybe not only cool and dark, but it's also desaturated. So all of these, you can kind of combine these principles together to create more powerful depth. So why, the practical application of this is that it just, a lot of times, even if you're not necessarily like trying to create sort of anything too three-dimensional, like sometimes we might be doing a more three-dimensional design, like with a sense of space, like realistic space, which works really well for this, like a room or a landscape or something like that. But just even with designs like this, like more kind of abstract designs, you can really work with these principles to create a sense of depth and also to create a sense of a focal point. You can see how all of the areas that are kind of coming forward in our design are also they're also like kind of like, when I mean coming forward, they're advancing towards us as opposed to receding. They're also the areas that become more of a focal point because our eye naturally goes towards those like parts, that it's emphasis or focal point. So in any design, whatever you're doing, like maybe you're doing like a simple website with text, and you want to highlight the logo. Well, maybe there's something about the logo that gives you a sense of that focal point, by advancing towards you. Maybe it's a bright color, like a warm color, or maybe it's more saturated or has more contrast to the background. So you can play with these principles no matter what you're doing. Same thing with photography or interior design. You can sort of think about how you can use depth to create the depth principles to create a sense of emphasis or dimension. Okay, so I'm not gonna talk too much then about that part in our individual reviews because I think everyone pretty much got it. Maybe just small tweaks here or there. I'm mostly, I think, gonna just focus on the next part, which is the what we were adding to this particular assignment to help kind of create more depth. We were using diminishing sizes and overlapping, right? So diminishing sizes is where you um, diminishing sizes is where you have a common element. A common element means that it's really similar. In this case, we're just using circles, so that's our common element because they compare to one another, and that's why it's useful to use that for diminishing sizes. And then the larger an element is, the closer it'll appear to us. And then, so that's where we would have put this lighter or whatever the side of the gradient, the interval was coming towards us. That's where we put the color for the biggest element is there. And then we receded smaller all the way back to this little part in here. And the other thing we were doing, there's a lot of things we were doing here, so if you didn't get them all, don't worry about it. There's many. And so the other thing too is overlapping. So we were using overlapping because when something overlaps, like so this row here naturally appears further away, not just because it's smaller, but also because it's being covered by this element in front of it. So you don't even need to have diminishing sizes to have overlapping create a sense of depth, but diminishing sizes does help, as does the color part. So we're kind of using all three of those things. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to open these up in Photoshop and we'll take a look at them individually. Okay, Chris. So I'll just keep talking about yours since I left off there in Bridge. And yeah, so as I said, you picked the good colors to create depth, and your design shows diminishing sizes. Really good job here with the overlapping. And you've also put them all in the right places. So this looks really good. The design is simple, but I think it's very effective, which not a bad thing. And I like the fact that you really filled your space. You're working here with a lot of positive space, and the negative space is your last swatch in here. So yeah, good job. I don't see any changes you need to make here. Okay, Cassie, same with you. I think you've done a nice job here at working with the circles, the diminishing sizes. The largest circles are at the side you've chosen to be the side that you feel is advancing right here, and then you have just moved slowly back to the end here, right here. And I like the way you've worked with overlapping in different places, and also the way that you've kind of like have your design sort of like partially off the page. I think that looks really good. Chris did that too, where you pull elements off the page. That makes, I think, a design look very or composition gives it a sense of working with the edges of the design, and just gives it a nice sense of positive and negative space. So nice job here too. You don't need to make any changes. Okay, sorry. Yeah, overlapping the ellipses. That's great. So you have done a good job here at working, with the largest circle here as the advancing element right in here, which is great. This one, it's really amazing. This one really, like when you have warm, like more saturated warm, which is also happens to be lighter, moving to a darker, cooler color, this is where you just tend to see some of the more really dramatic senses of depth, is in this particular, because you're having so many different things, the color effects creating that sense of depth, like warm versus cool, saturated versus desaturated, contrast, the lighter versus darker. So it kind of creates all that. So I would just say in your case, you could maybe experiment with giving yourself a little less negative space. You've got a lot of negative space here. Now, how do you do that? Essentially, what you would do is just make your circles, maybe at the beginning here, maybe a bit bigger, and then you could maybe have a little more overlapping, which is fine. I think you could overlap the, a little bit more. I think that would be the main thing. And then whichever template you did, there's like a layer that you cover this this edge with, like to place it in the right place. Like, so I would just review either the Illustrator or the Photoshop tutorials on how to do that. Another quick trick, if you find that that's just not working for you for whatever reason, when you're done, this isn't the most ideal, but it can work, is you take, I'm in Photoshop now, so whatever you're in, it would work pretty much the same. As I'm going to just sample with the eyedropper this particular white so that it's in the color picker now, and then you can just take the rectangular tool and just create a little of your own specialized mask, to cover that. So okay, yeah, good job, and I look forward to seeing your revision. Okay, Daedriona. Yeah, so this is a really terrific element right in here where you've got this like lightest color in here stacking to the back. I think that really is a nice use of circles. And I kind of feel like so some of the other so do make sure when you create the circle that you actually hold down the shift key that looks like what you did here, because if you don't then you end up with an oval. And ovals, they have their place in design, but in general, they can be a little bit tricky to work with because they always look like, or they often can look like that they're not quite a circle, so you're always wanting to try to move them into a circle. So this assignment wants you to use circles, and so just hold down the shift key, but that was just sort of a general comment on ovals in general. So, I kind of really do like this element. And I'd kind of like to see you maybe just take this one and repeat this particular one a few times over your design, like just repeat it. You can grab the whole thing and copy and paste it. Maybe you could, if you want to, you can sort of rotate it in different ways so it doesn't always just have to be exactly like oriented this way. But that's a really fun way to create a design, is just find something that works and then repeat it into the design so you create this pattern. And then you could just sort of remove all of this and then the other thing too is don't hesitate to maybe move some of your elements across the edge, like, so that you don't have to see the whole thing. So maybe this element is sort of like in a corner or kind of, if it doesn't fit, don't worry about it. It's nice to have things bleeding over the edges. This is so powerful, isn't it? Again, it's like that sense of going from the red or the warm color to the dark cool color. It really is pretty amazing how much depth you get. Okay, so that's what I'd suggest here, is just working a little bit more in your composition. Okay, Janae, yes, you definitely are on track. I think you have chosen good colors here, and you definitely are working with diminishing sizes and overlapping, which is terrific. I would just probably say, so because we have, like, this is our scale right in here, we really only have 5, 6, 7 colors, which isn't a lot. It can be hard to, we don't have ultimate ability to be creative in our compositions in terms of, we have a lot of limitations. And one of those is, I think that when you start here, right here, which is this color right here, right, then it's good to just go backwards until this becomes your background right here. I think that's your background. Yeah. So you'd only be able to have a maximum of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circles before, I noticed that you're having to like repeat them. And that, what happens is in that single strand, then we don't necessarily see the diminished, like the colors really doing their magic. So in each of these strands, I would say just repeat it, these ones. This is your background, so just use these colors, and when you get to this color, that's the last circle, and then you start another strand. So you'll have shorter strands. That's okay. You can use that experimentally. I think that could be really cool. Maybe you'd want to make some changes in your composition if you did that. Like maybe your first circle might be a bit bigger, and then your last one might be a bit smaller to kind of get that range in there. Yeah, so that's what I'd work on. For this one right here, yes, so warm. So the warm one would be in the foreground, that like this one. This is a great example of what to do here. Biggest, going backwards. What I would say is pick this for this one right here. This one I would put into the background right here. The very last one, just like you did here, just put that into the background. I think that will probably, because it's the darkest, it will probably read the most, like as the most dramatic depth if you do that. And then just do what you did here, which is having these circles go backwards. This would be the last circle, and this is the background. All right. Okay. Yeah. Just keep experimenting a little bit more. Okay, Ebony. Yeah. So in yours, let's just see down here. Yeah. So that looks really good. I like the really the big size you have here for the circle. I feel like when you start working with contrast in sizes, in the sense of having big or smaller things like circles, it's really good to be dramatic and really emphasize that. Why not? A lot of times design I think really benefits from a lot of sort of exaggeration, like, if you're going to make certain kinds of changes to differentiate things, like really be bold about that, which you have. And so I would just say in yours, what I would just say is for like, let's use this scale right here. So this is your first one and looks to be like your second one. Here, I think maybe you might want to, so right here, let's see this one. Yeah, so this one's going a little bit further down. So what I might do is add in a few more circles here, like, like, so 1, 2, 3, that's your next level. 4 is your background. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I always forget how many circles we have. 7 circles. So add like 3 more levels of circles so that you can actually have each one of these. I mean, you don't have to do this, but I think that you might as well take advantage of these colors to build upon. Maybe you don't have to use them all. Maybe add another level of circles, like back here, a little smaller, or we'll see, play with it. But so that, it's nice to have each of those colors so you really build the scale. You know what I mean? So just like add in whatever you're missing in here, make another level of circles and build on it. So like for this one, I might take, let's see here, 1, 2, and then here, this one would be this color, this level. Okay. All right. So, and then, so you're also using these little tiny lines here with contrast and color, which I think is, they will come forward a little bit. Like this is coming forward, and this also is going back, the darker bit in there. But I think if you keep it like you have, just very small amounts, I think you still are going to be able to develop enough of that depth, But if you do find, but you may want to try turning those off just to see what happens if I turn those off, because what is going to happen is wherever you do this, this is going to really diminish the amount of depth that you can get, as opposed to if you just had this color alone. Because this really does, it kind of like creates a sense of like a boundary where we don't quite get the interaction, and it also brings this part forward a little bit just because it's part of this, part of the area that we're, going forward, wanting to go forward. What you might want to do is just use these kind of cool circles inside, because I don't think it really matters so much inside. I think it's just the edges that maybe are more powerful. Okay, anyhow, so those are my suggestions for what you might play with a little bit more.